Soldiers for hire, private security firms are increasingly being used in conflicts around the world. Some are accused of doing the work states don't want to do. But is there accountability to make sure they're following international law? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. Erik Prince, the former head of private security firm Blackwater, whose forces killed 17 Iraqi civilians in 2007, has long faced accusations of profiteering from conflicts. He's now once again under scrutiny for his role in Libya's conflict. A confidential United Nations report obtained by the New York Times has found Prince violated an arms embargo. Al Jazeera has seen parts of the report which says Prince sent foreign mercenaries and weapons to Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar in 2019. At the time, Haftar was fighting to overthrow the internationally recognized government in Tripoli. Breaching the arms embargo exposes Prince, who's a staunch ally of former US President Donald Trump, to possible UN sanctions. And the report raises many questions about the secretive world of private security firms. Private military contractors have grown into a global industry. It's estimated to be worth more than $200 billion a year. Defense experts say some of them are used by state leaders to deny involvement in conflicts for diplomatic or legal reasons. A recent study said the Pentagon spent more than half of its $370 billion defense budget on contracting services in 2019. It also revealed America hired 53,000 contractors in the Middle East, compared to just 35,000 of its own soldiers. Some mercenary armies, like the Wagner Group, have been accused of being proxies for Russia. The group has reportedly been active in Libya, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Russian government denies any link to Wagner. Let's bring in our guest in Boston, Glenn Carl, former Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats at the CIA. Here in Doha, Omar Ashur, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Doha Institute. In London, Andreas Craig, Assistant Professor at King's College London and author of Commercializing Cosmopolitan Security. Welcome to you all. Glenn, this is the work of investigators that was presented to the United Nations Security Council about Erik Prince, the man who has navigated through the shadowy world of military contracting. He's been involved in many parts of the world. And it says that basically this is someone who was sending weapons, mercenaries, providing significant assistance to a warlord general who was trying to undermine an internationally recognized government. What repercussions are we likely to see here after this particular report?
Now that the administration in the United States has changed, there may be some. When Trump was in office, Prince was an advisor to and supporter of Donald Trump, and in turn received support, coverage, encouragement, and so on by Trump. With Biden in office and the rule of law returning to the United States government, the situation may change, but then that's not certain. Mercenaries exist and function in a shadow world where often governments choose to ignore their legal obligations.
Mm-hmm. Omar, are we likely to see a consensus among members of the United Nations Security Council that could lead to Erik Prince facing justice or possible sanctions?
Yes, in this particular case, it is possible, but it's hard to predict how this will unfold. With the PMC specifically, there's a complication of being registered as a company that provides military service and have an actual contracts with the Pentagon. That was the case in Iraq. And that's on one end, but on the other end, as using these resources and logistics and to violate a UN ban, a UN embargo on particular militias in Libya, And these militias are attacking a UN-backed government and basically acting as a spoiler of a UN-backed and international community-backed peace process in Libya. So there are multiple dimensions there that I think the legal experts will have a handful with.
All right, Andreas, when you look at the report itself, it talks about Erik Prince's involvement, but there is a legal and a political aspect to the story. 2019 is when there was this massive, unprecedented push by Haftar to take over areas in the worst part of Libya, including Tripoli. He was pushed back. What we learned after that was a series of tragic events, summary executions of civilians, opposition members, buried in unmarked graves. We're talking about serious allegations here, and people are pretty much concerned that the United Nations Security Council may not be able to say to Erik Prince, you will have to face justice for this particular incident. Right.
Well, the problem with this, I wrote about this in my latest book, Surrogate Warfare. It's about warfare by delegation. And I think Libya is such a very typical surrogate war of the 21st century, where there is a variety of different patrons who sponsor a variety of different actors on the ground. And, the UAE being the most important spoiler in this conflict, and the UAE being the most important patron in this conflict, over the last since 2014, the UAE has been the most important actor externally, financing, bankrolling, and delegating warfare by a variety of different actors under the wider umbrella of the LNA and Haftar. So it's very difficult to really pinpoint out who is responsible for any of these specific atrocities that have been committed around Tripoli and other parts of Western Libya in the latest operation that was started in 2019 by Haftar. The problem here is one of attribution. The problem here is one of very specific attempts by the UAE and its vast networks of surrogates on the ground to kind of muddy the waters of attribution and kind of find a way to conduct warfare through deniability and discretion. So that means, particularly for the UAE, to say we're actually not involved, we're not doing anything, despite the fact that there are bankrolling and supporting individuals like Erik Prince, who's providing very important capacity and capability for them in Western Libya.
Glenn, we're talking about an operation where Erik Prince was providing mercenaries, weapons, sophisticated technology. We're talking about an 80 million operation that includes convincing regional players to provide support, particularly with helicopters. You are a former Deputy National Intelligence Officer. Could this be the work of a lone wolf, or do you think you need to have key players here who would facilitate such things for you?
Oh, I think the only thing that's lone about Erik Prince is that he's a hustler, but he's not alone in that regard either. No, he was acting, it seems pretty clear, with the tacit or even direct encouragement by the Trump administration. I can't imagine that he would, well, yes, I can imagine that he would try to make a buck by selling soldiers and weapons to whoever wanted to purchase them. But in this instance, the United States under Trump was sending very conflicting messages. The formal institutions of government supporting the UN-backed government in Libya, and then Trump sending these confusing signals in conjunction with the UAE and Erik Prince. I'd like to make one other point, though. I think typically what happens with mercenaries and black operations and so on that become public is that it's then embarrassing. People have egg on their faces. The spotlight is turned to them. And so these operations, through the people who have been revealed and outed, will be shut down. But consequences, legal consequences, are far more problematic because you have in the UN process the backing or protection or murky behavior of the UAE, and in this instance of Russia, and even when it was Trump in the office of Donald Trump. So I would suspect that this behavior will continue, this kind of activity. This is sort of the new model of surrogate warfare. But Prince, in this instance, will be shut down for a time anyway.
Omar, if we are to put together the elements of the Libyan puzzle, 2019, Haftar, backed by the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan and Russia, launched his push to take over Tripoli. It's at that particular moment when Donald Trump made a phone call to him, widely seen at that particular moment as a signal that the Americans are in favor of Haftar, which they see as the bulwark against extremists in the region. Is it safe, looking against that particular backdrop, to say that it could be easy for Prince to use all those key players to his own political advantage?
Certainly. Okay, Donald Trump being in the White House has facilitated this environment of basically promoting a warlord, essentially, who portrayed himself as a solution in Libya. And who was very beneficial politically to some of the regional players, including the UAE, and some of the, let's say, military financial players embodied in the case of Erik Prince and his companies. So that on one side. But on the other side, it was to the detriment of also U.S. and perhaps other Western interests. One of the supposed targeted assassination was directed against Abdurauf Kara, who was mainly one of the main counterterrorism partners of the U.S. and of the Europeans against ISIS in Libya, in Tripoli. So basically, a supposedly warlord who was in alliance with the president of the U.S. at that time was permitted or given a green light, allegedly, by the president of the U.S. at the same time, was trying to act as a spoiler using weapons given by a U.S. Private contractor, weapon and assistance and military assistance, to undermine and spoil a UN-backed peace plan and assassinate some of the counterterrorism partners and counterinsurgency partners against ISIS on the other side. It tells you that the U.S. is playing against itself. It's kind of in a way.
Okay.
Or parts of the White House, parts of the U.S. government were playing against other parts of the U.S. government, and this is. Sure. Yeah, this complicates things even further.
Sure. Andreas, the story of Erik Prince is fascinating. This is someone who was the CEO of Blackwater that was forever tarnished after the incidents, the shooting of civilians in Iraq. He then created another company, Z. It was rebranded after the same company went into massive international criticism. Now and then back to another company, Academy. You get a sense that the international community does not seem to be willing to enforce sanctions against Erik Prince because perhaps he has very strong connections in the United States of America.
Yes and no. I think we need to be very careful to kind of all tarnish the entire industry based on Blackwater or based on the activities of someone like Erik Prince. I think we need to kind of draw a very clear line between contracting, which takes place in the security realm, not in the military realm, which is defensive in nature, and the vast majority of all DOD, DOS contracts, UK MOD contracts as well, are taking place in a realm of private security companies. They provide defensive security. They don't take part in active in military combat operations. The thing with Erik Prince and Blackwater was they were on the absolute other end of that spear. They were pushing the envelope, trying to get, with their armed contracting, into the realm of military contracting, becoming mercenaries. The issue here is mercenarism is something that has been outlawed. But making a case, as the gentleman and colleague from the United States said, making the case and also holding someone to account based on international law for mercenarism is highly, highly difficult. So Erik Prince was someone who's rebranded himself as well as rebranded many of his companies. It's not only one company that's been rebranded after Blackwater. We shouldn't forget Reflex Limited, which was or LLC, which was established in the UAE in 2010, which morphed into another entity. Then he had an entity to conduct anti-piracy operations in Somalia in the 2000s, in 2011 and 2012, again bankrolled by the UAE. The point here is it's not just backing from the United States or foreign players. The thing is, he operates in a realm of where no one can control him. There's a very important element here. And after the operation in Somalia, He actually fell out with Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE because he kind of, took some of the money that was intended for other operations. There were some issues with finances. He's not a trustworthy character, and he's been basically going behind the backs of all of his patrons, all of his clients, and that makes him entirely dangerous. And that's why I think it should keep a clear warning for people to actually go into business with him.
Let's move forward to different angles of this particular story. Glenn, the use of mercenaries. Do you have any concerns that this could, particularly in the near future, shape armed conflicts around the world? Private companies benefiting from massive financial support from key players internationally that could influence the outcome of conflicts in different parts of the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East?
Well, I know that it's the way you frame the issue and the question is sort of the contemporary, at right this moment perspective that the international community and news followers are taking. But I take a bit of exception to it because that characterizes what's happening as somehow really different than what has happened before. And I don't really see that being the case, except in one important way I'll talk about in just a second. Mercenaries and surrogates have always been used, and the CIA has done this, the Russian intelligence service has done this, and both continue to do this, as do other countries. And this has been the case since ancient times. So that's not really new. It provides a way for countries to claim that they're not involved, don't have control, avoid some consequence, muddy the waters, make it more difficult to denounce a country or to prosecute the perpetrators. So this has gone on and will continue to go on. The change is that the international system that we all live in has fallen apart, or a new one is emerging. And in this context, where the great power conflicts are murkier or less clear, decolonization is now done. The conflicts lend themselves more to secondary level kind of activities that are easier to deny and harder to control. So that is a change in the system, but not in the practice itself that has always existed.
Omar, when you have former President Trump pardoning four American men who were convicted in the killing of Iraqi civilians in 2007 who were working for Blackwater at the time when the international community is saying that it's about time to scrutinize some of those activities. Don't you see this as sending a wrong message to the international community, to the advocates who are trying to put an end to this practice?
No, I don't think, I just agree completely with Glenn. It won't stop. I mean, you can challenge it legally. You can convict some of the persons who committed violations, but it is very beneficial both for the states and for the PMCs, for the private military contractors, and for also militias that are in alliances with states. It's convenient politically. There is non-attribution element. There is you can conduct criminal warfare in a much better way. The body count. There is no political responsibility for any body counts because they are either private contract. Well, if they're from the same nationality, maybe, but sometimes they're not from the same nationality. The case of Hezbollah in Iran is very clear, and that's I know it's a different case. There's an ideological dimension there, but it's still a militia sponsored by a state. There's an economic benefits. It's very clear in the case of Erik Prince, but also very clear in something like the Wagner Group, which its controllers basically made significant. They can keep the spoils of war in a very ancient way. But also, I think the main difference, and here where I differ a bit from what Glenn has said, is the military and the combat effectiveness of some of these armed non-state actors, whether they are PMCs or militias or other kind of groups like ISIS, for example. They not only have changed the character of war in a way, but also they changed the end results of some of the battles and the operations and the wars conducted.
But this is
in ways that I don't think was seen before.
Gentlemen, I see your point.
We saw this in new data sets.
But this is the concern. Let me go to Andreas. We're talking about actors who are operating in countries, and the outcome of what they are doing is not only undermining the lives of civilians, it is changing the narrative. It is hijacking the right of the people to the point where it could leave behind a permanent, chaotic situation that the international community will have to grapple with. I'll give you just a simple example. So we're talking about Erik Prince. Wagner Group has been scrutinized, criticized, but because of the link with the Russians, everybody doesn't seem to be willing to move forward with an aggressive push to put an end to that practice. What should the international community do about this particular case?
Very important to highlight here that Wagner Group is part of the same nexus, and that's something we need to highlight. Erik Prince is not separate from Wagner Group. We should, don't forget the Seychelles meeting in 2017, where Erik Prince was very instrumental bringing the Russians, the Trump campaign, as well as the UAE together. And in Libya, we see this unfolding. And you're absolutely right. There is a problem here, a normative problem, because in many ways the liberal values have been undermined by using contracting and obviously outsourcing war fighting to mercenaries. And we've given it, and the Trump administration tacitly has given approval to these sort of operations. And it's a slippery slope that we're going down on. Obviously, a lot more has to be done here. But nobody seems to be interested, as Omar rightly said. Nobody has an interest to do this because both sides are winning. Wagner Group is obviously been stigmatized because they're Russia. But let's not forget, Erik Prince is working with the Russians indirectly. And the Russian operation was bankrolled by the UAE. This is part of the same nexus. So I think when we hold to account the Russians, we need to hold to account Erik Prince, and we need to hold account the Emiratis as well.
Glenn, we've reached a point in history where, just look at North Africa and the Middle East. There is a conflict, polarization, two key players backing members from opposing sides, and the Americans and the Europeans ultimately will have to take side. And we don't seem to be really willing to tackle the problem of the key regional players who have become part of the problem because they are providing significant financial military support to actors who are destabilizing the international order.
Well, a resounding yes, that is true. That's not new. I mean, we all will remember from college, or those who have studied political theory have what's called the Melian dialogue from 2,400 years ago from Thucydides, that the strong do what they wish and the weak suffer what they must. This is the tragic, horrendous reality that the international UN-based system, a normative system, attempts to regulate and to stop. But so long as countries perceive their national interests at play, they will do what they can get away with based on their strength. So the weak countries such as Libya, you can choose an almost infinite number of other examples, are the pawns and victims of the great power conflicts. We see this with France, Turkey, the United States, Russia, the UAE, Egypt, all tearing Libya apart de facto and attempting to advance their own interests. This will not change, I'm afraid.
Omar and Andreas, in less than 40 seconds, what is it that which we need now? Change of legislation, a different approach to this particular issue? Omar first.
I don't think a change of legislation is either possible, and even if it was possible, it won't affect things on the ground I would say, in the near future. Many of these states have vested interests in having either militias in alliance with them to do the job of their armies, so that it is lesser costs politically, socially, economically. Sometimes even there is a meeting on the ideological level or a meeting on the ideological level. And many of these militias and the private military contractors and our non-state actors are also benefiting from this situation. So it's very difficult to undermine it by a clause in an international law.
Andreas?
So I'm fairly pessimistic as well. But on the bright side, though, that we have self-regulatory regimes in Western countries that kind of say what a private military and security company can and cannot do. And most of these companies abide by it. I think we need to draw a line between what is contracting as supplementing some of the rules to support warfighting, but making sure that warfighting itself should be and remains the prerogative and under full control of the state, and should remain the monopoly of the state.
Glenn, Carl, Omar Ashur, Andreas Craig. I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahalbara, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.